Hi, it's Danielle Smith for Common Sense Calgary. We are interviewing candidates for the civic election this fall for Calgary City Council. And joining me now is your candidate for Ward 14, the incumbent, Peter Demong. Peter, thank you so much for being with me.
Absolutely, Danielle. Thanks for having me on your show.
All right, so you're running again. Is this third term for you?
This is actually four.
Fourth term. Okay, so you must still have some unfinished business and fire in your belly. Tell us why you're running again.
I do still have the fire in my belly. And there are a few reasons that I want to come back. One is a certain amount of consistency. We all know that there's going to be a massive amount of change over at City Hall, and there just needs to be some muscle memory or some consistency to allow these new councillors somebody to come to actually ask questions and get their feet in the right direction. So that's one reason. The second reason is something called a zero-based policy review that that we had tried out as a Council Innovation Fund concept about a year and a half ago. And what the whole point of this is, very much like the zero-based budgeting or the zero-based reviews that we do, I've brought forward the idea of doing this with our policies at the City Hall, because everybody knows that as much as you want to change taxes and lower taxes, if you don't have the policy in place, or rather if you have the wrong policy in place, administration is forced to follow these policies regardless of whether it's what the right thing to do or the most conservative or the most tax efficient manner to run it. So the whole idea is to go through every single policy at City Hall and start it from the zero base and try to build it back up and see, do we need this policy? What part of this policy is outdated? What part of this policy can be efficientized? How can we get rid of a certain amount of this red tape? The first one that we did as a council, as that came back about a year and a half ago, basically turned out saving about $150 million over a 5-year period for the Calgary economy. Now, this isn't Calgary administration or the city of Calgary, but it is for the overall economy, and that's a significant amount of money to loosen up and bring into the economy. So I'm hoping that once I get reelected, that we can put this as a front and center program or policy, a supplement, so that we can actually fix these policies and make them more streamlined. So it ties in with the red tape, but it has more to do with actual policy change.
It's sort of interesting to hear you talk about zero-based budgeting. We have a friend in common with Marcel Latouche, and he's been talking about that for years and years. So he'll be delighted to know that there's been some progress made on it. But do you have the buy-in on the part of your other council members to take this kind of approach? It seems like these ideas have been floated for decades and then not acted upon. So what's changed? What's different?
Well, this one's a little bit different in that it doesn't specifically talk about money, about trying to bring a budget down to zero base. It's not trying to change the entire structure of what the city does. This is simply taking the policy portion, which nobody really pays attention to. Everybody wants to create new policy. Nobody's at the other end discarding old policy saying, well, we've got this one, let's get rid of these two instead. And I think it's vitally important. It's part and parcel of what creates and continues a bureaucracy, is all of this policy over policy over policy, to the point where you're basically hand-tied and you have to go a certain path. So if we can actually get at those policies and start changing them, we can make some significant structural difference. Okay. Now, the third item, Danielle, is something that I think you're familiar with, and I hope you don't mind me calling you Danielle, because
no, please go ahead.
For 10 years, is extended producer responsibility. That whole tie-in for the circular economy. EPR is something that I have been ballyhooing about this entire term for 4 years, and I am absolutely delighted to see the government moving forward with the engagement program that's out right now with regards to EPR, and the fact that they're talking about putting some kind of product in place for legislation this fall. As you know, it's incredibly good for the environment. It's excellent for the economy. It creates jobs. It makes it easier for people in general to do the right thing. But what I find even more appealing is the fact that it's the equivalent of about a 5 to 10% property tax decrease. So the whole idea, I mean, when was the last time somebody said, you know what, I have a policy, it's not going to have any impact on city services, but I'm saving you between 5 and 10% of your property taxes.
It sounds like a good approach to take, but can you put some detail around it? Because I guess the thing when I think of extended producer liability, one of the things I think of is how we've charged a 5 cent per can tax or a contribution on cans, and that creates an incentive for people to take their cans and to be recycled. And I've wondered, is that when people are talking about how we might be able to get more people to return recyclables, is that what we'd be talking about, or how would it unfold?
It's a little bit different than that. It's actually something that starts basically if you want to have a sentence to describe it, what we're mostly trying to do is we're trying to privatize the recycling industry. We're giving it back to industry to say, listen, municipality and governments in general, we're just not good at innovation. We're not good at trying to find markets. This is not this is not what we're best at. So we're trying to say, let's bring it back to industry, back to business, who are the best in branch, best in world when it comes to innovating, when it comes to finding the best way to do things, the most efficient way to do things. Give it to private enterprise and they'll find the best way to do it. Now, what's happened is because Alberta is the last province in Canada, one of the very last provinces in Canada to come forward with extended producer responsibility, a lot of the costs involved are already tied into the marketplace. So, for example, a yogurt container that's created, there's roughly about a 10th or a 20th of a penny charge on each yogurt container, much like you'd be able to break down what a transportation cost charge would be on that yogurt container. This is what the disposal cost of this yogurt container is. Now, because EPR is in place all across Canada, those charges on the national brands are already being charged here in Alberta. So in some ways, we're already paying for this EPR program, but we're not getting any benefit. Now, there have been a couple of studies done also on whether bringing in an EPR would increase pricing to the average consumer. And the fact is, no, it doesn't. We've basically compared the prices in British Columbia, which has 100% EPR, and Manitoba and Saskatchewan, which have 50% EPR, and they're identical with what we're paying here in Alberta. So there isn't going to be an increase in costs. It could be argued that we are basically offsetting an equalization payment that we're already paying to the rest of Canada.
Let me ask you then how it's going to affect people in their blue boxes. Same thing? Do you just put the recyclables in the blue box and then it gets taken away and somebody figures out useful products to create out of the stream?
Basically, that's exactly it. What the whole concept is to allow the industry and business to do what the city and municipal governments cannot do. And that is, it's going to be the exact same system. You're still going to take your plastic products, or your recyclables into the blue bin. Somebody else will probably be picking up that blue bin and taking it to a sorter, and that sorter will be managed by that other company. So suddenly, instead of the city trying to do this or the municipal government trying to do this as an arm of itself, you actually let business take care of it and turn out and deal with their end product. The double whammy bonus of that is that once they're held responsible and they're starting to say, oh, you know what, we're really having trouble finding a market for this product X, Y, and Z, it's into their hands that they can say, maybe we should change that product mix. Maybe we should change what exactly we're creating here so that's easier for us in the long run to dispose of it. So that's the entire gist of the EPR program. And that's why I was trying so hard to bring it to the province, to bring it forward as legislation. And I'm delighted to see that all of my work has come to fruition.
Well, it sounds like there's going to be a lot of potential development. So I'll have to check back with you on that one. But let me ask you about the sunk cost already of the existing recycling infrastructure. Is that just lost money, or is there some way of repurposing the current recycling facilities to get better value?
That again is, I'm sorry, didn't mean to interrupt.
Yeah.
I've got a knack for doing that. That is one of the things that's going to determine how the legislation and the regulations are determined. Depending on how that transition period or transition place goes from municipalities operating to a third party operating it for us. Is it a matter of us selling this product or this infrastructure to them? Is it a matter of us keeping ownership and leasing it to them? There's all kinds of intricacies, and this is where it gets really complicated and difficult to maneuver, so to speak. And that's where the big wigs and the smart people go in and start figuring things out.
All right. I'm looking forward to seeing how that develops. Well, while we're talking about private sector, though, do you see other areas where there can be contracting out and privatization? I know there was a discussion about garbage collection, a discussion about golf courses being run by private operators with the snowfall that took place in December, some discussion about whether that might need to have more private sector involvement. How do you see it?
Well, I mean, one of the things I want to remind everybody is that we do an awful lot of private sector contracting out right now. When you talk about the snow and ice control, a lot of that is basically when we've got private contractors on the payroll, basically just waiting for the snow to hit. Because if we wanted to have all of that equipment ourselves, the cost would be just astronomical. But we basically have these people on call, so when it does they do a big snow, they report to us first. In the same way, we are privatizing a third of the city out for the black garbage bin pickup. As far as I'm concerned, if there are ways that we can privatize some portions of the city municipality, I think we should obviously take a look at in each and any one of them. As I've said, generally speaking, businesses will find a more efficient, a more smarter way of doing business. So if we can find some of those, absolutely, I'm in favor of looking at them.
Okay, I just want to ask you a little bit more about snow removal because, boy, a lot of candidates have heard about it. And so if it was working perfectly, then there wouldn't have been the kind of problems that we saw in December. I think the big issue was over a month later, there was still some impassable streets in some of the in the residential areas, and getting in and out of cul-de-sacs. My mom lives on a cul-de-sac. I know it was impossible. So what happened there? What was different this time, and what needs to be looked at so it doesn't happen again?
Well, one of the problems is that we try to be as accommodating as possible when we consider pulling one of these snow bans, parking bans. Now, keeping in mind, council has they don't actually say call this a parking ban, don't call a parking ban. We send that off to the roads director, and it's his choice, his call. But a lot of things come into play as to it's over a Christmas period. Do you really want to call a snow ban, a parking ban over a Christmas period when you know that a number of people may not be available to actually move their vehicles and thus get these thousands of parking tickets? There are other issues with regards to has the snow been the right quantity of what we want? Are we expecting nice weather within a week from after that snowfall, which we were actually expecting nice weather after that, just wasn't as nice as what we were hoping for. So, I mean, you're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. If you go out and you go all out now after a snowfall and say, we got to get rid of this snow right now, and 3 days later you have plus 12 Chinook weather conditions, then we take the abuse from the other side of the coin. Why would you bother spending $8 million clearing roads? So in some cases, it's a damned if you do, damned if you don't kind of thing.
Yeah, and it was, I guess, complicated this year because of the COVID restrictions. Everybody was staying at home as well, so more cars on the street. Fair point.
Exactly.
Let's talk a little bit more about the budget because let's go to the issue of zero-based budgeting.
Sure.
If it hasn't been adopted by the city, why not? What is there? Are there some complications in trying to do that?
Well, I mean, keeping in mind that municipal budgeting is unique in and of itself to any other type of budgeting, even the federal and provincial have a different style of budgeting. I don't particularly appreciate the fact that it's a completely unique style, but I understand that there is the requirement for it because we are significantly different than any other organization in that we cannot carry debt. There's the way we carry capital budgeting versus operating budgeting is a little bit different. We just had a conversation with, I think it was Jack Mintz up at AUMA talking about how we should be looking at adjusting how municipal budgeting is done. But it's difficult to try and do that in isolation. It almost has to come through the MGA so that everybody can adapt their municipal budgeting in the same way. Now, zero-based budgeting is a wonderful concept, and I like the idea because most people do it in their homes as a base. And I'm not... when I got elected back in 2010, that's what we pushed for in the very first part. We didn't quite get zero-based budgeting, but we did get something called zero-based. Sorry, I'm going to try that again. Zero-based service reviews. Now we've gone through every department and we found literally tens of millions of dollars by backtracking through the initial budgets and finding. Again, like I said, breaking it down to the zero and building it back up as to what services we should be offering, what services we shouldn't be offering. And that in itself is where the zero-based budgeting becomes an issue. Because to zero-based budget, you've got to know what level of service you're going to be definitely going for and what level of service you're not going to be going for. And we adjust those every year at budget, depending on who's in the councillors' chairs. If you've got a majority of people that believe we should be spending far more on transit or housing or something along those lines, that's a completely different zero-based budget build from when you've got those that are saying, well, let's not do this, that, and the other thing. So it's complicated, but I'm sincerely hoping that we can move towards that. We will need provincial.
So connect this then to how the taxpayer experiences it. Because yes, I've seen lots of news stories about how all of these savings have been found, and then they talk about the cumulative savings, and it's in the order of hundreds of millions of dollars. But then you talk to the taxpayer and they say, well, if we're finding all these savings, why has my tax bill doubled in the last 10 years? And when you talk to the business community as well, they've seen even more dramatic increases. And so there doesn't seem to be a connection between finding those savings and having it defray some of the tax increases. And so can you explain why that is?
Well, I mean, I could take the easy route and say, well, can you imagine what your taxes could have been? But no, I'm not going to go there. The zero-based reviews have come up with literally tens of millions over a 10-year period. So it's important to keep them in line and monitor their growth, et cetera. So that's important. The hundreds of millions you're talking about is the budget savings account that I actually brought forward back in 2014. And although it's stated as saving $700+ million, it's not savings. It's budget savings, but more often than not, it's budget cost avoidance. So cost savings and cost avoidance. So what happened was in 2014, we had just finished passing a budget that was expecting the good times to continue rolling for the next 4 years. And we were expecting increases of 25, 30,000 people coming to Calgary every year, and probably 4 to 5% property tax increases just to keep up with inflation and population growth. So what I did was got together with the city manager, Jeff Fielding, at that point. He came out with his budget savings account, which basically was to say, whatever we can do to, I'm not going to say tear apart the existing budget, but to bring it back into alignment with what we needed it to be doing. So basically, a lot of that $700+ million is cost avoidance. But nevertheless, that's good. I mean, the fact that we didn't go out and start building X, Y, and Z because we weren't needing it at the time, you have to understand, when you're changing a bureaucratic budget, you've been in provincial government, you know that you don't just change it tomorrow and it stops. It's steering a giant aircraft carrier and trying to get it to move. So over that 4-year period from 2014 to 18, the whole idea was to try to find where we don't have to spend, and more important, if we do, how can we spend as little as possible? The idea behind it was every department was to be able to come forward with their savings. And as you've always heard, if a department has money, they're going to spend it at the end of the year so they don't lose it for next year. It's not necessarily true, but I understand the sentiment. So the idea was, at the end of the year, if you can save X amount of money, department person, you get to move that money into your next year, where instead of just losing it, you get to keep it. Now, it was actually to change. It wasn't all of it. They got to keep half, and the other half went into this budget savings account. So we did that for about a 4 or 5 year period, and it's still ongoing. We're still using the budget savings account concept for keeping costs in line, et cetera. So that is your basic answer as to why we aren't seeing these massive cuts in taxes. But it's also one of those things that you have to understand. It's not just a matter of saying, I want lower taxes on budget day. I want to see a 5 or a 10% budget tax cut. You have to do the work as councillors to find those methods of where we're going to cut those costs. How do we find a 5 to 10% property tax discount? What can we do to stop spending money or spend far less money, like with the rapid flash beacon RRFBs, or rapid flash beacon pedestrian crosswalks that I came up with back in the early 2012. Basically, half to 2/3 of the cost of one of the standard pedestrian crosswalks by using just a simpler method, a simpler tool. So it's stuff like that as a councillor, I like to be proud. I'm proud of myself for having brought forward a number of these cost-cutting, cost avoidance ideas, much like EPR, which is going to be another 3 or 4 years to get through, which is why I need to get there again.
Well, let me then ask you about the big ticket item, which is the wages, benefits, pensions. I think that that's one of the big issues, is that you've had in the past some settlements on the union agreements that have ended up seeing wages go up higher than the rate of inflation. You have also got a pay grid so that even if you were to have some austerity, you kind of built in increases as people move up the grid. Have you thought of how you might address that? There have been constructive things done in the private sector to reduce salaries. What could you do?
That's a tricky one that I have been trying to think myself through. And It's awkward. I mean, when you have to deal with unions, there are rules and regulations when dealing with unions that as a counselor we certainly can't get involved in. But you have to understand what is involved in dealing with unions. If they don't want to sign a contract, they can wait out a contract and basically just wait until the time is right. The last one that you referenced, where they had increases beyond what we're expecting, well, that came about as the exact same time as that last budget, where we basically thought we were going to be going in for another 4 years of just bountiful, huge economic and increases. And we were having trouble manning buses at that point, trying to hire people, to keep people was the whole point. So yeah, we signed ourselves into an unfortunate situation where we gave too much of an increase, and the economy fell off the cliff that very next month, kind of thing. So what do? It's not like the union's going to say, oh, you know what? No, I don't need these increases. You could take this money back. We don't really need it. It's unlikely that's going to happen, as much as I want it to. Now, having said that, in the last series of negotiations, we did encourage and demand a set of zeros and small increases. So that is working its way through. As far as management and management exempt, we did just finish doing a study. I can't remember who the third party was, but basically it was an exhaustive study of comparing city employees and private employees. And it was to be expected. There are some areas where we're overpaying, and in some of the areas that I don't know if we should be. Something like lifeguards we're paying way too much for, as opposed to something like lawyers. We're vastly underpaying the lawyers at the City of Calgary compared to what they can make in the private world. Now, the difference in the private and the public, as you're aware, is there is a certain amount of certainty in your job and as at the city, but you don't enjoy the wild swings, ups and downs that you get in the private industry. Whereas you can certainly get if you're out in the private, there are bonuses involved. There's share buybacks, all kinds of stuff that isn't available to the city. So I don't want to get too far into that depth. Do we need to continue to constantly control costs at the city, and especially the human side? Absolutely. That is, well, it's our biggest cost, and we've got to try and continue to find ways to keep that to a minimum.
What about the council pay? Because I know that one council member who's now running for mayor has made that, that's been in his crosshairs. And I think the notion behind it is that if you want to have the credibility to go to your staff to take a cut, you've got to be the first one to reduce some of the benefits. Do you think council members are paid appropriately, or do you think that there should be some austerity there?
It really depends on who you ask. But I mean, the question I always ask myself is, what quality of person do I want running the city for me? Do I want somebody that is accustomed to making a minimum wage or something along those lines? No, I want somebody that has had experience, that has had the opportunity to be in the private world and is willing to take whatever comes with being a politician for the time that you're willing to be a politician. And I think it's important that you pay them a reasonable amount so that they don't just say, you know what, I can't afford to do this, or worse yet, only the rich people can afford to become your politicians, which is a horrible idea. Keeping in mind that over the last 4 years, our salaries reflectively, I believe, have gone down 3 to 5%. I'm not entirely sure what, just as an average, just along that average weekly earnings concept. So it's not like we're increasing our salaries. We are seeing decreases. As far as management exempt, I don't believe the management exempt over 5 or 6 years now has seen actual increases on a like cost of living allowance increase for 5, 6 years. So although a lot of people are saying, why isn't the city doing more? There certainly is a lot of stuff being done from a city's perspective.
All right. You said taking on all the things you have to take on as a council member. So I can imagine there's a few things that you're thinking of, maybe some tweets that came your way, because you do end up having to take a lot of abuse. It's true. But let me ask you the perception that people have of the current configuration on Calgary City Council. I think the public is of the view that the council members don't get along particularly well and have a hard time coming to consensus on issues and moving things forward. Is that a fair assessment? Or do you think that there is more progress being made than people may know?
There is definitely more progress than people will know. I mean, we are 15 councillors, 14 at the moment, members of council, I should say, that need to get along to get anything done. Is there some animosity involved? Well, of course there is. We're arguably at each other's throats every 2 weeks on a Monday, trying to push our own agenda and what we think is the right thing to do. Does that mean that there's division in the ranks? Well, yeah, absolutely. There are certain, you can tell on council where there's certain groups that kind of get along and have that similar line of thinking. Is it more divisive than it has been in years? I suppose it is a little bit, but I think a lot of that has to do with just the overall sentiment in society right now. There's a lot of discontent. There's a lot of pent up frustration. COVID certainly isn't helping the situation. The economy certainly hasn't helped us in any way, shape, or form for that. I mean, it's an awful lot easier getting along with everybody when the streets are paved with gold and honey is flowing and milk and honey is flowing down them. So is there more? Yeah, I think it's got more to do with just the general overall society dysfunction at this point.
Let me talk to you about how you get the revenues flowing again, because I get the sense, and you can tell me if you think it's an unfair observation, I do get the sense that Calgary was caught by surprise. The city was caught by surprise by the hollowing out of downtown. And then the solution was, well, let's just push it out to the businesses in the outlying areas. And then when that became to be excessively burdensome to those small businesses, then we're now having a conversation about a tax shift to residential, and residential isn't happy about that either. It feels like Calgary's just waiting for things to return, so rather than address the issue of keeping taxes low and finding those kinds of savings. So tell me how you see the tax picture working. Well, how does it sort itself out?
So I have to go back to your initial supposition when you suggested that when the hollowing out of downtown happened, that we pushed the taxes out to these outlying businesses around the city. We didn't do that. That's the system doing it. That's the system that the MGA mandates that we use for property tax.
May I just say, though, I think that you've made the decision that you want to generate 50% of your tax revenues from the business community and 50% from residential. That isn't required by the MGA, because I've talked to many municipalities. Yeah, so I think that's why, because you created this arbitrary amount of money you want to get out of the business community. It means that if one part ends up shrinking, it puts the burden to the rest of the business community.
That's correct, yes. How do you fix an economy that has been dependent upon or has been focused on one industry for the part of 30 years, and then that industry kind of takes a dive off the cliff? Well, it's a long process. It takes time. It takes a lot of effort, and it is going to take a lot of money to actually build back that downtown into things that we want it to be. We can't just abandon it. It's what Calgary is. So we need to start trying to encourage as many different industries to be coming to the city of Calgary to take up shop. At the same time, we should be looking for some that we can use tax incentives to may have some of the older buildings demolished and have some kind of a tax-free period while they rebuild. All of these things we're trying to look at, but nothing happens quickly. I mean, we've looked at Pittsburgh, we've looked at Denver with the loss of their steel industry, we've looked at Nashville with the loss of the coal industry. There's a lot of situations where this has happened, and what we've seen is that it's a long, semi-expensive process that you need to focus on, take your time, and understand the playing field and do everything you can to bring those players to the table. Now, Calgary, as far as I'm concerned, has a lot to give. And although our downtown has hollowed out, keeping in mind, we are still, Canada is considered the best country in the world, according to the last poll that from Barron's or Bloomberg, I think it was. Calgary is still considered the 5th most livable city anywhere on the planet, the best in the Western Hemisphere. So we've got a lot to offer. We've got an awful lot of experience in the energy field. I believe that we can be drawing, a lot of these energy companies are talking about changing to not just being energy, but energy. not just oil and gas, but overall energy companies. And that is something that I think Calgary could really rock the place with, because we do have an abundance of wind. As anybody that's ever lived here knows, we've got an abundance of sun, one of the best places in the country to actually for solar power. We've got the people power to progress this. So that's one industry that I want to see us continue and move forward on. We can continue. We seem to be doing very well on the artificial intelligence and the new economy side of things. So it's just a matter of allowing these things to build and to continue to encourage these companies to come.
All right. I want to jump off what you'd said about affordability and get your sense of this. It's a perceived battle. And again, I'm happy if you think that I'm misperceiving it, but it does seem like there's been far more interest in trying to densify and build up, and a reluctance to do more greenfield development. I'm thinking of the proposals that came forward for 10 new communities, and the notion was that there wasn't enough money to make sure that they had proper fire halls and fire hall staffing so that was put on pause. And so I'm wondering how you perceive it. Like, what is the balance between growing up and densifying versus growing out?
I think it's perfectly feasible to be doing both. The fact of the matter is we have different demographics in this city. Excuse me. There is the new and young people that are coming up are saying, listen, I don't want to have to worry about mowing that darn lawn for every Saturday afternoon. I want to actually go out Saturday morning to a pub down the block from me. I don't mind living in a condo that's 700 square feet on the 28th floor in the Beltline. And that's fantastic for them. That's great. And for those, we need to actually start allowing it and doing whatever we can to encourage that kind of development. At the same time, there are a lot of people that are still coming to Canada and Calgary saying, you know what, my dream has always been to own my own home and have that piece of land. So I don't think we should be trying to restrict either. I think there's room for growth in both areas. One of the advantages and one of the things that I think a lot of people forget when we're talking about greenfield development is the amount of money that is brought into the economy. Building a house, building a neighborhood, there is hundreds, if not thousands, of jobs in creating those roads, the pipes, the waters, et cetera, and that's what is that? The fourth largest industry in Calgary is the construction industry. So that is not something that I'm willing to turn around and turn the taps off on.
All right, let's talk about the Guidebook for Great Communities, because I think it's connected. And there was a bit of a furor when it first came out. I think, and this always happens, where council and the people who are directly impacted, working on it for years, they know all about it, but then the public feels like they're blindsided. So tell me your take on it. Were some mistakes made there?
I'm not sure if mistakes were made. I think there's a bit of a hurried nature to it, that they're basically saying, okay, we've got this one set up and we feel that it's the right thing to do. So let's now take this and expand it over across the entire city. Now, there are a lot of good things in that guidebook. There's some things that I think should be changed, but my biggest problem is I have no intention of approving something that's going to have massive impacts to my neighborhood. Maybe not in 5 or 10 years, but by the time it does, they won't even know that it's happened. So I don't see why we can't just take a foot off the gas pedal for another year, actually do some serious, intense engagement with those that don't know anything about it. Because half the problem is not knowing. If I don't know what it is, chances are I'm going to be against it, as opposed to understanding it first and saying, oh, well, that's not so bad. I can understand that. That makes sense. So I think it's just a matter of saying, yes, I've heard over and over, you've been working on it for 5 years, which means you're working on it last term. So what's wrong with extending it another year into the next term and allowing everybody to actually understand? Over and above which, all of this engagement during COVID, I'm sorry, I'm on streaming live, Teams, Zoom, Boom, Bimba, whatever there is on a constant basis. And I can tell you, it is nothing like in-person conversations. Being able to actually understand body language and the rest of the conversation, I think it's a mistake to go forward with it without actually just engaging the people that are going to be more.
So I look at your award, and I think maybe some of the pushback would be that I think of it as being mostly R1, mostly single-family homes. But give me some idea of, are there areas where you could densify in your communities that would make sense, so that it would put some of your constituents at ease?
Well, you got to realize that my communities, I mean, the oldest of my communities, like, I'm older than them. So I'm hoping that I don't need reconstruction in the very near future, although someplace Never mind. Let's change that topic. Most of my communities, I think, are a little on the young side for seeing this in the very near future. Can I see it in some areas? Yeah, actually, there's a couple that I can think of that might be very intrigued at seeing a condo development coming forward instead of the broken down gas station that's still got a fence sitting around it. So yeah, there are areas that it could be, but I think this is more to do with the older new. Whereas in the 50 to 80 year range that are seriously seeing redevelopment happening on an ad hoc basis. And this is one way to basically turn it around and say, well, instead of being ad hoc, here's where you can build, here's where you can't build. But at the same time, I would like people to understand that concept instead of having it pushed down their throat.
Okay, let's talk a bit about the capital side of the budget if we could. So Green Line LRT, it started off, as you know, with a pretty good concept that had everybody buy in. 3 levels of government funding it, $4.7 billion, 40 kilometers. It would go to the deep south. It would go to the deep north. Perfect project until it wasn't. The engineering now has it at $5.5 billion. It's only going to be 20 kilometers long. The transportation minister says he doesn't like the proposal because it doesn't connect properly into the existing system. So may have to be re-engineered or scrapped. So tell me how that impasse gets solved. How do you see it?
I honestly don't have an answer for that, Danielle. I really wish I did. It is like herding cats, trying to get 3 different levels of government to agree on all the different rules and regulations. I'm personally frustrated because I'm seeing these cost increases happening left, right, and center because of what's happening in the economy, and it's only going to get worse with the massive increase in that's happening down in the States. If we had actually gotten started on this about 4 years ago, I think we would have had a far better project going forward. How we deal with the downtown is really one of the main problems, and I've always had this problem. I'm on record as having agreed with a number of councillors saying, well, let's definitely take it downtown. And is there not an option for us to kind of say, let's take it downtown, let's let it stop there? Just like many places, I've been in Vancouver, basically you get into one spot, you have to walk a block and a half and go down to the next line. I certainly understand how that works. And I'm trying to understand why we can't do something like that here in Calgary. So in some ways, I do think that we need to relook at what we're doing on the Green Line. I mean, I think we're going to have to regardless, just because the costs are at the point where I don't know where we find that overage.
All right, let's talk about other capital costs as well, because when the CFO gave advice to council about the 4 big capital projects, they said that you wouldn't be able to afford all of them. So I want to understand how you would have prioritized and which one you thought is the most important to go ahead. So the event center with the Calgary Flames, the BMO convention space expansion, Arts Commons, and the Foothills Fieldhouse. So if you had only been able to choose one, which of those would be your priority? Well,
actually, you can go back to my voting record. I did say I want the one. Give me the arena, and we'll look at the others in due time when we actually can afford them. When the next one came along and said, well, we can do the BMO with no added cost to the city because the province is willing to give us the CRL, I said, okay, well, that makes sense. Let's do the BMO then because we've actually got the financing. The other two, I believe and I agree that they are needed infrastructure and it is going to be part of reconstructing the downtown core. But at the same time, I'm looking for areas that are not going to cost the city as much money. Now, people will say, well, you're giving away money to billionaires to build this event center. And it's, well, yes and no. I'm giving money to have an event center to be able to be in the city so that we can have and offer all kinds of things that most cities should be offering. Whether everybody will be able to go there or not is one thing. But at the same time, I've got a 50% partner that's ponying up a good chunk of coin for that, because at some point or another, if we say no to the Flames, we're still going to have to create an event center of some sort over the next 10 or 20 years, one way or another. So I'd just as soon have somebody at the table giving me money. Whereas I look at something like the Arts Common, who is going to be costing roughly the same amount of money from a taxpayer point of view that we're putting into the event center, I don't have a partner. And it's going to be just as expensive to go to a jazz or a ballet, which I love. Don't get me wrong. I've got a daughter in dance, and I'm all in favor of the arts. Don't misunderstand me. But if I'm going to be footing the entire bill for that, I would like to put it into position where I want it to be available when we have funding to be able to actually do this kind of project.
All right, let's use that as a transition to talk about the public art program as well, because I think
No.
people feel somewhat the same. No, you don't want to talk about it? Okay, we'll go on to the next one. Well, I'm wondering if you feel confident that the way council has changed the approval process will mean that we won't have the same kind of black eyes that we've had in the past. There's been a few clangers. I think the big blue ring is one. The wishing well, which burns holes in people's clothing over the Genesis Center, is the other, and of course the Beaufort Towers. I've had candidates say it looks like a piece of construction material left behind. So I think that's part of it, is that there's just been a few embarrassments. And do you feel like that's been corrected with the new approach?
We won't know until the next couple of projects come forward. We sincerely want it to work. It's meant to beautify the city. I can understand how in times of economic downturn, people are saying, well, why are we still doing it? And I agree with them. That's why I tried back in 2015 to say, let's put a hold on this. And so notice a motion came through, I lost, of course, saying, let's hold the art programs for the next X amount of time until the economy recovers. Didn't work, didn't kind of fly through. Is this the right solution? I don't know. It's a solution. Let's see what comes of it, I guess. Okay,
let's talk about big ticket items for the police, fire, and EMS. Just wondering if you have any different approach you'd take to them. So let's talk about police first, because there was a campaign. It called itself the Defund the Police movement. I know people have sort of object to that term, but that was sort of the language that was being used. And I think the notion was to take a portion of the police budget and put it to alternative service providers so that there'd be a different approach when there's mental health calls or addiction calls. So do you support that basic approach?
Well, the problem that I have is that the proposal that was brought forward was to take the money from the police department from the get-go, turn it around and start creating what this was going to look like and how we're going to save the police department money in the long run by doing the mental health assistance and these other aspects of that are brought forward for defunding police. I much preferred the process that we did put forward to say, well, we've got money in the FSR. Let's take a chunk of money, put it into this program. Once you start seeing results, then let's see the police department actually start offsetting when they're seeing, okay, we don't have to hire 5 more police officers. Instead of hiring those 5, let's transfer those funds over to this program, which is starting to show results, and move the project in a way that actually people can see transparently that process. Things are happening. We're moving forward, and you can actually see the progress that's happening.
Okay.
I'm not a big fan of just automatically cutting one and saying, okay, let's start over here, because I don't know what this is going to look like. It's going to take a couple of years. So that's where I'm sitting with that.
All right, let's talk about fire. Let me begin by asking you about EMS dispatch, because there was a battle that took place of those who still had decentralized dispatch. And I think the province would argue that they're trying to save money. I think the city would argue that they're worried about response time. So tell me, was that the right battle to take on?
That's exactly the battle that was happening. There's a concern that the having people in different cities trying to steer our emergency services into areas that they're unfamiliar with in the first place is going to cause problems. There are going to be issues. I know personally down in Foothills, working with Reeve Owl down there, there have been numerous really bad situations that have developed from the same concept. And they're the ones that got basically merged prior to us. And we're looking at these going, well, we certainly don't want to have that happen to our 1.5 million people. Can we not do this, please? Now, I get it. Province is always looking for ways to save money. So are we. We totally understand that. I'm of the opinion, and I've always thought, that we should never have allowed the paramedics to separate from the fire department in the first place back in 2006, 7, 8, because as far as I'm concerned, they're completely intertwined. And in some ways, I think paramedics should be just basically firemen or vice versa. I think there's a money-saving thing. There's other issues at place. So I'm not trying to make a blanket statement there. Please don't make that a campaign issue for me. But there's synergies in paramedics and fire department that I think we should be maximizing rather than minimizing.
Well, so you're right, because that's one of the things that became very clear, is that fire gets called in some cases to more medical calls than they even do to fire calls. And there's one way of looking at that, is that's an example of how integrated they are. The other way of looking at it is should that be addressed? Is that the appropriate use of fire resources?
I'm not entirely sure if that's the right number, if it's the right way to go. What I am sure of is when I see people, and I go to these firehouses, and I come out to these after the scene situations, and I talk to people. The one thing that comes out loud and clear every time is, I was just so happy to see somebody come to my help. I didn't care whether they had a fireman's outfit on, a paramedic's outfit, a cop outfit. They could have worn a clown mask. They're out to help me. I'm just glad they came. So that in and of itself is kind of where I turn around and go, I actually initially about 5-8 years ago was pushing to say, stop sending the fire department to all these hospitals, all these safety issues. I've actually come to terms with the fact that, you know what, we have a service out there. It's available. It's smart. They know what they're doing. They're good at what they do. Let's let them do what they do. And that in itself is what the constituents, I think, are really looking for. When I need help, have help be here. Now, is it the help you need? Maybe not, but at least they're there. Part of the problem with the dispatch issue is that right now, when we used to send a fire department, it was very easy to follow up with the police and say, follow them along. Right now, when we send it to the 911 system, the merged system, they send out the ambulance, but then there's a whole different circle of phone calling that to get the police out there. As it turns out, we need somebody because this guy's got a knife or something along those lines, even though he's hurt. So it is complicated. I still think that if we could actually have the province and the municipality sit down and talk it through, we could get something. But there is this whole municipal, provincial constantly going on.
Yeah, good point. Okay, let's talk just about the role that you see yourself as an elected representative on two fronts, because we've had a number of proposals and actually active referenda campaigns. So I think for the Olympic bid, fluoride is going to go to the people in the fall. There was a proposal that 40-kilometer speed limit reduction in residential areas go to the people, but the council made a decision to go ahead on that anyway. So give me your sense. Would you prefer to see more things go to direct vote, or would you prefer for everything to be decided by council?
Way more direct vote. It's part and parcel of what I believe in. I basically do Demong dialers on a regular basis to find out demon dialers. You guys, I call them Demong dialers.
That's funny. I was going to say, was that a misspeak? Oh, that's funny though.
Find out my constituents' viewpoints on numerous items, whether it be speed limits, whether it be fluoride. I've done some on secondary suites. It's just, for me, it helps. I mean, I'm representing 90,000 plus constituents. It's hard for me to say I know exactly what they want every time. There's no way I'm going to get that. In the same way, I'm always shocked why people wouldn't put a question or two at every election. It's practically free. You get, and it's not part of the concern, and part of what people don't understand is that it's non-binding. Once that question's asked, that doesn't force any councillors into a specific mode. But my point is, why wouldn't you take advantage of the most accurate polling system on the planet to find out people's feelings about specific topics? And it doesn't even have to be things that are going to be voted on. Whether we should be continuing with OSIF would be a very easy one to put on the ballot. Whether we should be continuing to the Green Line, all kinds of things that we could be asking, but we don't. And my question is, why on earth wouldn't we take advantage of that? As a matter of fact, I'm going to be pushing this term to start saying every election, we should be thinking about one or two questions to put on that ballot. Right. It's something that, like I say, if we can get a feel for what 1.5 million Calgarians feel about something, we should. Why not?
I was just going to say, people who aren't familiar with acronyms might be thinking, what is OSIF? So tell me what OSIF is.
I'm sorry. And I got to tell you, the reason I use that one is I can never remember what the full name of that is. It's basically the fund that the city is using to try to encourage businesses and industry to come to Calgary.
Oh, the $100 million fund from the Calgary Economic Development. Gotcha. Yeah. Okay, perfect.
But the other side of this coin is I am a little bit frustrated that the province is basically changing, is using a municipal election for their purposes. Now, I know that's being a little petty on my side, but I have to ask, are they going to be willing come the next provincial election for us to put a couple of questions on their ballot? I've asked that and I've been told no, not a chance. So I just kind of, it always seems to be their way and then their way. So I find it a little frustrating because municipal elections, I've always thought to try and get people to focus on something they rarely actually focus on, and that is the government that is closest level to them, that has most direct impact on them, and have them actually explore a number of topics.
All right. Well, because you do Demong dialers, I have a suspicion I know how you're going to answer this next question, but you always are in a position where you have to balance the interests of your constituents with what is recommended by the city administration. And so if you end up with this battle where the city administration say the one path would be best for the city as a whole, but your constituents want you to vote another way, how do you balance that? What do you do?
Well, I mean, this is one of those situations where you're basically asking me, what is your thought process in determining decisions? The first thing I try to do is I try to take politics out of it. These decisions, it's difficult. I don't see any reason whether it's a left of center, right of center. Excuse me. It should be based on the facts at hand. So that's the first process I go through. The second process is I've been a small businessman for a good part of my life, and I'll always take that as one of the first things I look at, and look at it from a business point of view and say, what are the good points here? What are the strong points? What's it going to cost? Is it going to save any money? Where are the benefits? Then I'll take it to the next stage and find out, okay, so what is my gut feeling as a Calgarian, as a father, as a husband? Where do I feel? And then I do my very best to reach out and to think about what those 90,000 constituents would want me to do and which direction they want to go in. Because I've always believed that I'm going to bring City Hall, I'm going to bring them to City Hall as opposed to bring City Hall out to them. It's the wrong point. It's the wrong point of view. So I'm always trying to get the input from as many constituents as possible, whether that be Demong dialers, whether that be just going out and door knocking, phone calls, my council talk. Everything I've done is to try and encourage people to come out and have their voices known. As I've always said, if you don't have your voice known, if you don't use your voice, somebody else is going to use it for you. Community stations is also another huge thing that I'm a huge fan of, and they're the ones that I take their opinions of quite regularly.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time today. I sure appreciate the conversation.
Fantastic. And if you get a chance, check out my website and do the survey.
You got it. That is your Ward 14 candidate for City Council, Peter Demong.
Thank you, Danielle.
Thank you.